a really, really bad one. Shiner didn't suit up in 1972, but he played 5 games for the Falcons during the 1971 season. In the 5 games that Shiner appeared in, the Falcons went 3-2. In the 3 games he won, he looked very good, posting a passer rating of 116.3. And in the 2 games he lost, not so much. In those 2 losses, Shiner threw no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and had a passer rating of 23.6. For perspective, if you did nothing on each play but spiked the ball into the ground, you would finish with a passer rating of 39.6. So the wildly inconsistent Shiner was going to be starting the season for the Falcons under center. And in week 1, their opponent was the really bad defensive unit known as the New Orleans Saints. To put it lightly, the 1972 Saints were really bad. They finished tied with the Eagles for the worst record in the NFC at 2-11-1. And part of the reason why was because of their defense. The defense allowed 25.8 points per game that season, which was the 4th worst total in the league. And in their final 7 games, they allowed 27 or more points in 4 of them. And one of those games was against the Falcons in a 36-20 loss. It was a defense that couldn't stop a nosebleed. They allowed the 2nd most passing touchdowns in the league and allowed over 5 yards per play. And back in 1972, this was really bad. Now, in fairness to the Saints, it was a really young defense. No starter on the defense was over the age of 28. However, it was a really bad defense, and no player on that defense ever made a Pro Bowl or received an All-Pro nomination prior to that season, and no player received one after that season. It was a defense largely consisting of nobodies. And it didn't help that they traded away their 2nd pick in the 1973 NFL Draft to the Colts, who selected Pro Bowler Burt Jones with that spot. Add all those factors up, and it's not hard to see why good offensive opponents feasted on them. And with the 1973 season starting, you had a wildly inconsistent quarterback in Atlanta going up against a pretty atrocious defense in New Orleans. If said quarterback had his A-game going, things could get ugly. And sure enough, they did. September 16th, 1973. What's remarkable about this game was that the game was scoreless after 1 quarter. Through 1 quarter, the Saints were holding their own defensively. Remember, the Falcons in their 2 meetings against the Saints in 1972 hung 57 points on them. So the fact that it was scoreless after 1 was pretty impressive. The Saints had a new head coach that season, with John North replacing J.D. Roberts. So maybe things were on the up and up. They were not, because it got very ugly very fast. Atlanta scored 3 touchdowns in the 2nd quarter along with a field goal. Then the Falcons opened up the 3rd quarter with a touchdown pass from Dick Shiner to Ken Burrow, the 2nd time that those two had hooked up on the day. After a scoreless 1st quarter, Atlanta had scored 31 unanswered points. New Orleans got on the scoreboard after with an Archie Manning touchdown pass, but the beating only continued to get worse after that. Dick Shiner threw his 3rd touchdown pass of the day, the Falcons got 2 more rushing touchdowns, backup quarterback Bob Lee threw a touchdown pass for good measure, and Mike Mayer hit his 2nd field goal of the day to give the Falcons a convincing 62-7 victory. Atlanta had 496 yards of total offense, and their defense contributed to the offense as well. The Falcons forced 8 turnovers, which gave the offense plenty of possessions. Atlanta showed glimpses of this turnover-oriented defense in 1972. They forced 6 turnovers in 2 games during the 1972 season, winning against the Rams and the Oilers in those games. However, this 8 turnover performance in this game was remarkable. Atlanta had 32 first downs, and quarterback Dick Shiner had a perfect 158.3 passer rating. Now, while the league has retroactively given passer ratings that were perfect to other quarterbacks, this was the first time in NFL history since the creation of that stat that a quarterback was perfect. He went 13 for 15 with 227 yards and 3 touchdowns, throwing more touchdowns than incompletions. Safe to say, It was a perfect day for the Falcons. They had set the record for most points by any team ever in Week 1. They had tons of momentum going into their Week 2 game against the Rams. And then, it all came crashing down. Week 1 was a near-perfect game on offense. It's tough to do much better than 62 points. But on the flip side, it's tough to do much worse than what the Falcons did in Week 2. Remember what I said about Dick Shiner being wildly inconsistent? Never was that more apparent than the start of the 1973 season. Again, much like the Saints game, it was scoreless after the first quarter. And much like the Saints game, a team scored 31 unanswered points after the scoreless first. But this time, it was the Rams. And this time, those 31 points would be the only points scored in the game. After winning their first game 62-7, the Falcons had lost their second game by a final score of 31-0. They had gotten shut out. And this game wasn't just any shutout. This was an embarrassment. The defense, which held Archie Manning and company in check last week, couldn't stop John Haddle and the Rams' passing attack in this one. Haddle went 12 for 15 with 2 touchdowns and a 145.7 passer rating. After forcing 8 turnovers in Week 1, they forced none in Week 2. The defense allowed over 200 yards rushing and didn't record any sacks. To say that the defense had a letdown would be an understatement. But the offense, oh boy, the offense. When a team allows 7 points one week and then 31 the next, it's noteworthy to an extent. But when an offense scores 62 points one week and then gets shut out the following week, it's eye-popping. The Falcons had 2 first downs the entire game. After having 496 yards of total offense in Week 1, they had 70 in Week 2. At the quarterback position, Dick Shiner went 2 for 9 with 17 yards passing, no touchdowns, an interception, and a passer rating of 0.0. That's right. After posting a perfect passer rating, he posted the worst possible passer rating a quarterback could have. To make matters worse, he got sacked twice for a loss of 13 yards, meaning that the Falcons had a grand total of 4 net passing yards. 4 net passing yards. Need I say more? Atlanta lost their next 2 games after that, falling to 1-3. And after the 1-3 start, Shiner never played another game for the team and joined the Patriots midway through the season. Eventually, the Falcons turned it around. Following their 1-3 start, they won 7 straight games and finished the season just on the outside of the playoffs, going 9-5 and finishing 1 game out of the wild card. It was the team's best record in franchise history up until that point. But the 1973 Falcons will forever be known for their bizarre start. After scoring 62 points to open it up, they got shut out the following week. Let that be a lesson to the Ravens after their 59-point drubbing against Miami. The NFL is a week-to-week league, and what you did the previous week is irrelevant. And the 1973 Falcons and their bizarre 2-game start to the season is a perfect example of that.